If you think it's time to take a hammer to your bathroom scale and rip up that diet rulebook, welcome to Body Kindness. Hi, everyone. It's Rebecca Scritchfield, author of Body Kindness and host of this podcast. I'm a health at every size dietitian, a certified exercise physiologist, a former chronic dieter, and a mom to 2 girls. Join me as I talk to guests about what it means to be good to ourselves and create a better life where well-being matters, not weight. Through these conversations, we'll reveal the challenging and surprising ways our culture keeps us searching for our worth in our appearance. Let's create a new view of health that's inclusive and built on compassion. Let's shake things up a bit and let's change the game.
Of course you want to lose weight. Of course, given the culture we live in, of course you believe that that's the only way that this can get any better. And I know it's uncomfortable to hear me say that I don't know what's going to happen to your body with this work, but I trust your body. And I know that you can develop the resilience needed to handle whatever happens when we do this exploratory work.
That was Dana Sturtevant. Dana is a trainer, mentor, yoga teacher, and dietitian specializing in health at every size and intuitive eating. She's the co-founder of Be Nourished, a community-based outpatient clinic and professional training institute that encourages movement toward a compassionate, weight-inclusive model of a radical self-care to address body oppression, heal body shame, and associated patterns of chronic dieting and disordered eating. And she's facilitated over 3,500 workshops throughout the United States. I'm really excited to bring you this conversation with Dana, a dietitian who I've looked up to for a number of years. I really think she represents this new approach that many dietitians are starting to take, especially younger dietitians who are coming into the field. And as we watch the movement of body positivity and fat activism really push the boundaries of how we judge people based on their size and how, healthcare providers really should be looking at providing positive, helpful care, right? And how do we treat people at various weights? What are the recommendations we offer? What's the evidence behind the recommendations? And how really do we help people create a better life? So we get in conversations about our training, we get in conversations about our epiphanies and how, we are just changing the approach and the positive outcomes that are associated with that. We get in a conversation about shame that I think is really important. And also, one of the things that I really found helpful in our conversation was our conversation about nutrition philosophies and how, absolutely, actually she calls them food philosophies, right? So that we all find a way of eating that works for us, but Dana has concerns about how we take this and then project it, especially when it looks like food rules and diet culture messages about this is good and bad food and good and bad people. So, I feel like I could have talked to her for hours. I think you're going to find many helpful nuggets in our conversation here. And I think what I want any listener to get out of this is just an understanding that, through kindness and connection and compassion with ourselves, finding a way of healing our relationship with food and our bodies also does include improvements in how we talk to ourselves and take care of ourselves. And it really means that we need to step away from the idea that thinner is better and healthier, and that when we're actually more open and connected and inclusive of all weights and shapes and appearances, when we respect our cultural histories, and when we, stop colluding with diet culture as registered dietitians, that we actually can really open up space for healing to begin. It's not fighting weight loss. It's actually about resisting the idea that we need to push our bodies to a weight that we can't naturally and easily sustain through restriction. So that is what a radical dietitian is trying to resist. Enjoy the show. Hey, Dana, welcome to Body Kindness. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really, really excited to talk to you today. I love our topic. It's good to be rad. I want to talk about what it means to be radical. And I can honestly say there is not a better dietitian on the planet. Or maybe there's a little group of a couple of you, I would say. But just that I personally hold up as the epitome, the picture, the definition of what I would say is showing how helpful and beneficial it can to be radical in your life and in your work and in the field of dietetics. So I'm so, so grateful you're going to give us this time today to have an important conversation.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's very sweet.
Why don't we start by just sharing a little bit more for the listeners, a little bit about your background, what you do, what you care about, so we can get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, I'm clinically trained as a registered dietitian. I tend to call myself a nutrition therapist on my business card and in my practice because I think it's a better umbrella for what it really is, to speak to what I really do, which is to help people heal their relationship with food and their bodies. And I find, most of the clients that I work with come in knowing far too much about food and nutrition. And in the process of dieting and disordered eating, they've been on a variety of plans that are often contradictory to each other. One's promoting one food, one's telling you not to eat that food. And so when people come in to see me, the last thing they need is another person telling them what to eat and how much to eat and what's the right way of eating. We focus more on their relationship with food, their relationship with themselves, their relationship with their bodies, and really explore how their thoughts and their feelings and their beliefs influence the choices they make in their lives. And I love saying in their lives because I think, we go from kind of the micro of, here they are to talk to me about their relationship with food, but we also go to the macro of like pulling the lens wide and looking at their life and all the things that make self-care challenging. Mm-hmm. So I started my career 20 years ago in Oregon in the dominant weight paradigm. I was in the traditional weight paradigm, and I was a healthcare provider like many who didn't believe that they were promoting dieting, was aware that dieting had a 95% failure rate. And yet I was focused on weight loss with my clients, particularly in research, working on research studies, looking at a 6-month weight loss intervention and then some follow-up strategies to help people keep the weight off. And none of us thought we were promoting dieting. We all thought we were promoting healthy lifestyles. And we were prescribing eating disordered behaviors for high body weight people. So, knowing what I know now, that is how I see it. Back then, I didn't see it that way. But probably in 2008, I went to a conference that a slide was put up that said, we prescribe for fat bodies the very behaviors we diagnose as eating disordered in thin ones. And that slide, combined with discovering the idea of a dieting mind and a diet mentality, really helped me start to see that that people were dieting and they were engaging in disordered eating, and we could call it whatever we wanted. We asked people to weigh themselves, keep food records, track their calories, exercise according to a set of guidelines. It had nothing to do with embodiment, listening, attunement. And, in hindsight, we were promoting dieting. We could call it whatever we wanted. And so after working in this field, in that research job for it was probably around 5 years in that I started to wonder about the intervention. I started to wonder why we were talking to people about their weight when I thought we could trust people's bodies to sort that out. And we could just focus on self-care and healing and health, and the body's going to do what it's going to do, that we don't really have control over that. I was aware of that on some level. But of course, when I brought this up in meetings, the investigators and research team would look at me like, like something was wrong with me. And so I started to feel unethical in my work, and these researchers had used the same 6-month weight loss intervention for probably close to 20 years with the same results, that of course people's weight is down at 6 months. Many people lose weight on many of these plans out there, but the sustainability of it, at 2 years, people's weight was back up and then some. And, of course, the researchers blamed the participants and the participants blamed themselves. And I started to think that the intervention was the problem. But, everyone believed the intervention worked. And I'm putting that in air quotes because people lost weight. But this way people were eating was not sustainable for them in the long term. And eventually, as most people do, the honeymoon phase ends and they're in the marriage, so to speak, and it's not as exciting, and they start to regain the weight. And so I knew, speaking of the notion of radical, I knew there wasn't a job out there for me, that somebody was going to hire me to do what I wanted to do. And I didn't even know what it was I wanted to do, but I knew there wasn't going to be a job description that said, looking for a dietitian interested in mindfulness and self-acceptance practice and shame resilience and body trust. And,
and ignoring everything she was taught in school.
Correct. So I did know when I was in school that I wasn't going to be the traditional dietitian. I knew that a lot of many of the roles dietitian in medical communities was not really what I was drawn to. And I knew that I was going to have a different career than many, but I didn't know that I would have my own business. And, so when I started to feel unethical, I decided to open a private practice. And I knew I wanted to partner with a therapist. And I ended up getting an office in a clinic where I met Hillary Canavy, who's my business partner, and she's a therapist. And we started a group there called Making Peace with Your Body. And we just started bringing women into a room to talk about this. Mm-hmm. And that is where Be Nourished was born. That's the name of my business, Be Nourished. And we have a philosophy we've spent 12, 13 years developing called Body Trust. And our approach and work is really helping people reclaim the body trust that we believe is a birthright.
I love every time I hear body trust is your birthright. It's like, yes, I want to put all the emojis I can after that, because it is such a simple sentence, and yet it's a powerful form of activism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It really, something we say is that we're born into the world with this. Mm-hmm. And it's a reclamation to reclaim body trust. And this idea that it's a birthright is a really powerful way of noting that. Mm-hmm. And, part of healing, I think, is helping people start to externalize the shame, blame, and bias that they're experiencing. All of like the participants in the research studies used to blame themselves for their failures. And, nobody was blaming Weight Watchers, and nobody's blaming Jenny Craig, and nobody's blaming, Whole30. People tend to blame themselves, and nobody, a lot of times people aren't thinking about how trauma and racism and oppression and poverty impact their relationship with food. And so, when we start to really explore how this idea that we once had trust with our bodies, and at some point it was taken from us, it was hijacked, and we start to explore how we lost that trust with our bodies, I think that's where we start to see a shift where people stop blaming themselves and starting to put the blame in the places where it belongs.
And is that what you think, like, if we think about like the question of like, what makes a radical dietitian, right? I mean, is it as simple as rejecting the predominant weight normative paradigm?
It's interesting when you brought up the notion of radical. I was like, oh, I just heard Sonia Renee Taylor. I just read something, and I actually had typed it up, and so I pulled it up before we started, and I'm going to read it. She said, "The notion of radical demands that we deal with the intersections of our social, political, and economic lives in relationship to our bodies." So I'm going to read that again. The notion of radical demands that we deal with the intersections of our social, political, and economic lives in relationship to our bodies. And so that's one thing I'm thinking about. It means radical, that this is rooted, this work is rooted in intersectional feminism. It's liberatory work. It's really acknowledging the whole person. That is part of what, to me, radical means. Being a radical dietitian means that we acknowledge the whole person. We acknowledge trauma, oppression, racism, stigma, and all of the things that can impact a person's relationship with their body over time, and also a person's health status. I think healthcare providers rely too heavily on personal responsibility rhetoric and this idea that if we get sick, it's our fault and we have control. And if we just do the right things and make the right choices and perform health behaviors, that we will achieve health. And health is far more complicated than that. It's really a social construct. It exists on a continuum from the time you are born until the time you die. And there are so many factors that influence health that we don't even acknowledge. And frankly, I don't think you could put a room full of dietitians or healthcare providers, ask a room full of dietitians and healthcare providers to define health, and you're not going to get one definition. So to me, radical means rejecting a lot of the mainstream ways we've been made to believe or what impacts health and people's well-being.
And, it's interesting because when people approach me with like confusion and curiosity, one of the questions is like, well, but like my clients come in asking for weight loss. So what am I supposed to do? So how would you address that and answer that for sort of a confused, maybe open-minded, but on the fence dietitian?
Well, I think a lot starts with the way you market your business. If you say you do weight loss, like they're going to come into you for weight loss. I can tell you that I'm very honest in my work. I tell people in my bio that my practice is weight neutral. I'm not for weight loss. I'm not against it, that I trust your body to sort it out. And I'm not going to be another provider who claims to know that what you're supposed to weigh or how to solve the problem of your body weight. And so I tell clients one of three things will happen to you when you work with me and do this healing work. You will, lose weight, you will gain weight, or your weight will stay the same. And we don't know, but I can tell you it can be different. You can feel more free. You can feel lighter when the shame of like the weight of body shame is lifted, but that doesn't necessarily translate to weight loss for everybody. And so I don't make any promises about weight. And one thing to think about is how you market yourself. Many people, especially when they first start to come to this weight inclusive paradigm, or sometimes we call it health at every size, they do this kind of bait and switch marketing where they lure people in with weight loss language. And then they say, psych, we're not going to focus on your weight. We're going to focus on intuitive eating. And I think when we market with weight loss language, we're colluding with diet culture. And we've grown a business with no weight loss language. And I will tell you that people still come in wanting to lose weight. So
that's not going to go away because they're living in our messed up world.
Exactly. So, I think one is to be transparent in the work you do. And even when you're honest about your philosophy and that your approach is not about weight, people still come in with the hope, sometimes secretively and sometimes not so secretively, that this will be the thing that leads their body to the thin ideal. And it's common when people show up in my office to kind of be straddling this. Like they have one foot in Be Nourished and one foot at Weight Watchers, or, one foot in this kind of body trust exploration and one foot over at OA. And so I think it's normal. One thing I say is, I say to my clients, of course you want to lose weight. Of course, given the culture we live in, of course, you believe that that's the only way that this can get any better. And I know it's uncomfortable to hear me say that I don't know what's going to happen to your body with this work, but I trust your body. And I know that you can develop the resilience needed to handle whatever happens when we do this exploratory work. And so I think that's the way we talk about it. I think sometimes exploring what people mean, like I think when people use weight loss language, a lot of times they're talking more about how they want to feel.
Yeah.
And they assume that weight loss is required to feel a certain way, and that's not true. So, and I make space for that, make space for the ambivalence. I make space for the uncertainty. I make space for the grief. This is grief work. If we as providers can't talk about grief when people are moving away from the dream of being thin, like we are missing something big. And you don't have to be a therapist to talk about grief. You don't have to be a therapist to do empathy. You don't have to be a therapist to listen. It's powerful to name it as grief work for people. And one of the first phases of people really moving into this work is to know that they can't go back, that they're done they don't have tolerance to dieting, and they can't go back even though they may not know how to go forward. And just to acknowledge how uncomfortable that is, to know that you can't do another diet, that your tolerance has gotten so low to food restriction that you can be on a diet now for maybe 6 minutes to 6 hours. But, what you used to be able to do for 6 months is not, you can't, it's a sign of health when you lose your tolerance to dieting.
Yay, your brain and body are working in your defense because you're over it.
Totally.
Well, we've very, very gently touched on words like weight stigma and oppression, but I found it interesting when I was listening to you talk about the idea of giving up weight control, but of course, making space for this desire. But also maybe let's talk for a couple minutes of acknowledging for the desire for weight loss about getting to conform to culture and maybe experience less stigma, and how there's that can be a source of the attachment. Because I don't necessarily think all dietitians really understand that piece of it.
That with one of the reasons why people want to lose weight is so that they'll be respected and they won't experience stigma and live in, to kind of hustle away from a stigmatized body and that shame. Is that what?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think one is educating clients on the idea of weight stigma and the idea of how hard it is to take care of something you don't like. And we live in a culture that pathologizes and stigmatizes larger bodied people. And that pathologization and stigmatization influences all bodies. It impacts all of us, but it's especially harmful for those of us living in larger bodies. I talk about the hypervigilance. If, reading Roxane Gay's memoir, Hunger, really talks about what it's like to walk around the world in a larger body, walking into a room, wondering if there's going to be a chair that can accommodate your body, walking into a restaurant, wondering if you're going to be able to navigate between the tables to get to your table, right? This level of stigma and stress has an impact on health. And there is research to show that, and to even question that the things we say are the health problems associated with a higher body weight may in fact be the health problems associated with the stigma of living in a larger body. So the blood pressure, the blood sugars are not so much about the higher body weight, but the stigma of living in a larger body and walking around the world in a body that is pathologized, and a ton of assumptions are made. Sometimes I give these, like, we want fat people to go to the gym and exercise. Like healthcare providers want their patients to be in the gym exercising, but how do you walk into a place where everybody's there not to look like you, right? This is what we start to talk about, and we start to talk about how messed up the culture is, and that we're helping people, one, start to see that and stop blaming themselves, that people are adopting this hustle and this hypervigilance to they're hustling for worthiness. They're not hustling for health.
And so part of that work, progress in the work, is helping them realize their own resilience. Like, I mean, we can all work to change culture. It's going to take a really, really, really long time, but we want to help them be resilient and in the body they have now, knowing that they have an extra layer of judgment, shame, and blame that is just put on them, just applied based off of an appearance judgment, nothing to do with facts or health. And even if there was a health problem, to your point earlier, we didn't define it as healthism, but I love referencing your definition of healthism. So I hope you'll talk about that too.
Yes. I think the diet industry and the cosmetic fitness industry have gotten really good at shape-shifting and using language from the body positive movement to lure people into their programs that are just rooted in shame. I always, it's something that's really powerful for clients. And we have a card in our Body Trust card deck that says, notice who is making money off of your shame. Right. And that's what these people are doing. This is not about body, Weight Watchers and this freestyle stuff. But it's just, if it's about your weight, it's dieting. We could call it whatever we want. But, the industry has gotten really good at using more like health language. And it's like, a lot of my clients say, well, it's not really about my weight. I just want to be healthy. Or even when my larger body clients get concern trolled from their family members, it's, I don't care what you look like. I just want you to be healthy. Well, you might want to look up the definition of shame and know that shame, when you shame people and make them feel unworthy, which is what you're doing with your health splaining and your concern trolling, is shame is poorly correlated with self-care. It's highly correlated with addiction and bullying and depression and eating disorders and suicidality. And so when we shame people, they tend to move away from health. But I think many of my clients believe they gave up dieting years ago and believe they've just been trying to eat healthier, watch what they eat. And then when we look at the qualities of a dieting mind, they're like, oh my gosh, I've been dieting this whole time. I had no idea. So I think in that bargaining phase of grief, when we're grieving the thin ideal, when we're grieving the illusion of control, when we're grieving the death of the big reveal, the day we arrive, a lot of people start to bargain and make it more about their health. And what they find out is it's really rooted in the dieting mind. So, we live in a culture that believes our health is the be all and end all to our existence. And if we're not pursuing and performing health, we are a failure. And I think this has a lot more to do with human beings' need for certainty and a way to manage our anxiety around the uncertainty of life and our desire to want to control. And it's not really about health when we look at it. Many of the people who are hyper focused on health are, when we really look at it, look an awful lot like a person with an eating disorder. It may just be under the guise of health instead of, obsession with thinness or pursuing a certain type of body. It's more around controlling anxiety about, health scares and things like that.
I was reading an article the other day about our major air quotes wellness culture, and that they were studying about it being like the need for the attachment to it is really related to our human way of processing death anxiety.
Yes.
So when you brought up anxiety, I wanted to add, and fear of dying, that anything that passes our mouth is either, I do not own a single Whole30 book, but I've looked at the free pages on like Amazon or whatever. And there's a sentence right there that says every food that crosses your lips either adds to your life or takes away from it, or adds to your health or takes away from it. It is that. Talk about fear mongering, like radical fear mongering. It's just playing into that human, nature of I've got to be afraid of everything, which at one time served a beneficial purpose. But no, we do not have an obesity epidemic or a sugar epidemic. We have an epidemic of weight stigma and an epidemic of shame and blame and judgment. And, for people who go into the field of healthcare, we're actually not doing a very good job about caring for people's well-being.
Mm-hmm. It's an epidemic of people not wanting to do vulnerability in a lot of ways. As you were talking, it's like, this belief that we can get out of doing vulnerability, which is, as a human being, we are vulnerable. You look at this mass hurricane that was going, moving towards the state of Florida, knowing that beast of a storm was coming, and there's only so much we can do. And, you even had some of these gun people like shooting at Hurricane Irma, because of course they're the ones who definitely don't do vulnerability. But I was like, oh yeah, even they are like trying to shoot at the hurricane, like a gun is going to change the path of the hurricane.
But they have to do something.
But they have to do something to feel like they're in control, right? And so I think so much of this is, especially this health, over focus on health, and it being this thing that we should all pursue, is really rooted in human beings not wanting to feel vulnerable in the world. And we don't get out of it no matter what. Like, you can think you're not doing vulnerability, but you're vulnerable no matter what. So how do we develop a resiliency to kind of live with knowing? And we're the only, organism, this is something Hillary says, and we're the only organism that knows that they're going to die. We don't know that dogs know they're going to die.
Oh,
or
that's true.
But we're aware of our death. And so, and when we experience people dying around us, we see that vulnerability, because this is so much of size acceptance and body acceptance work can be likened to a grief process. I think there's so many parallels here. And I was sitting next to a guy on the plane the other day, and he just started talking me up. And I don't even know how we got down this path, but he had recently lost his mother, and he was talking about a book on grief. And I said, I'm kind of obsessed with. He was apologizing because he was crying, and I was like, it's fine, and you don't have to apologize. And I'm happy to hold space. And he said, I said, I'm kind of obsessed with grief. So this is a good fit for me. But I thought, I don't think there's very many people that would say I'm kind of obsessed with this idea of grief and the stages of it. And so,
yeah, no, I agree with that. And even, there's a whole death positive community, that's looking at evaluating our relationship with death and what's wrong with it. And I am not an expert, but I like to follow the conversation on the Twitterverse and all that. But it's really fascinating. It brings us back, I think, to our humanity and hopefully our common humanity. For me, that's a big reason why I radicalized myself, was just realizing that I care about human beings and I care about doing what it is I should do to be most helpful for the human being to have a better life. And it just, after, my own dieting mishaps and loving school, because I was like, woo, calorie counts, and trying all the other, the stuff that you think is helpful. You just, one day you wake up and you realize it's not. And as dietitians, that is sort of having that sort of oh shit moment, wake up call is not easy, because it's like part of what you think is so valuable is like pushing the healthy eating. And I think that's one of the big barriers. Like dietitians don't know how to reconcile how the work changes. Do you have any like sort of advice or feedback or thoughts on that issue? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and listening to you talk, I think one of the things that was, I think, different, I think a lot of the dietetic students in my program were there kind of excited to learn calorie counts, and it's known that our profession has a high percentage of eating disorders. I don't know what it is, but compared to other healthcare providers, like we have a higher percentage. And I think, looking back, I think it was my healthist beliefs that really led me to nutrition. I even came across some letters that I had written to my grandmother when I was in college, and my grandma passed away a few years, and she'd saved all the letters that I wrote to her. Aww. So when my parents brought me the letters, and I was going through them, and one of them was cringing. It said something like, "I'm going to school to be a dietitian, and I can't wait to tell people how to eat right," or something like that. And I was like, "Oh, girl, you were so clueless."
Naivete.
Like you had no idea where you were headed, did you? Whereas now when people who are interested in the field of nutrition write to me and say, "Oh, I really want to pick your brain, and I'd love to talk to you about I'm like, "Oh, girl, if you come in and talk to me about this, you are not going to want to be a dietitian. I am going to be the biggest buzzkill for you. Like, you picked the wrong person to call up about this." So, I think when it comes to nutrition, the way I talk, it's funny when you bring up like that quote, was it in Whole30 that says everything you put in your mouth takes you closer or farther away from death.
Exactly.
Or health or whatever. We have a card in our Body Trust card deck that says there is no one meal or eating episode that has the power to heal or kill you. And of course we're not talking about like people with severe peanut allergies and things like this. There are people who, can't even fly in a plane when there's peanuts on it. So we're not talking about those people. We're talking about this level of insanity, that's this belief that every morsel, every bite I take is that powerful. I like to tell clients that it is what we do consistently over time that matters, that our body benefits from what we do consistently and predictably over time. It likes that consistency, it likes the predictability, and it benefits most from what we do over the course of a prolonged period of time, not what we can do for a whole 30 days, for instance. And many people end up in this swinging place of, rigidity and perfectionism to screw it, and then back to rigidity and perfectionism and screw it. Well, I don't think that's really health promoting. And we know if it also induces weight cycling, where you're going up and down, that has harmful impacts on our health and well-being, not to mention our self-esteem and our, self-compassion and all of that. So, those are some of the things when I talk about nutrition, and that it's a really young science, that we really have to be willing to admit that there's a lot more that we don't know than that we know. And I think we're kidding ourselves when we talk with such certainty, when we are very aware that, 1 year, there's the superfood or the super nutrient. And then the next, 3 years later, we're finding out that eating a lot of that is harmful. And so it's constantly contradicting itself. It's a young science. I think science and research in general has to come from a place of how much we don't know, and starting from the place of what we don't know versus what we do know. And I think we need to be asking the questions of who are asking who are the people who get to ask the questions? Who are the people who aren't, how many researchers do you know came from poverty, oppression? We're upholding in a lot of ways white supremacy. It's white people coming up with the Whole30. It's white people coming up with these plans. It has a lot to do with class. And, when I look at a lot of these diets, they just look like a bunch of classist bullshit. Even when you look into the gut microbiome community, and I'm super fascinated and haven't done enough reading on it to really understand, but I also think like, are there a lot of like people of color talking about their leaky guts and their SIBO I don't think there's a lot of like, people from minority communities obsessed with this kind of shit. Like, what's that about? And there's even research to show that came out recently that like the Mediterranean diet, which is probably one of the diets that most dietitians would like get behind, that what they find is that there's a benefit when you have a higher income, you're from a higher class, but when you're from a lower class, like a poverty level, the Mediterranean diet does not benefit you one bit.
Right. Exactly.
So, yes. So these are the kinds of things I'm thinking about when I talk about nutrition, and particularly nutritionism.
Yeah.
And the word ism implies that we're talking about an ideology. We're not talking about a science. Healthism, nutritionism, these are ideologies. These are not solid sciences. There is not a body of evidence supporting these dietary protocols. There needs to be a body of evidence to support dietary protocols. We can't take one research study and say, here we have a study and this is fact, right? There's a lot of pseudoscience and little research studies, but not a body of evidence when it comes to most of this stuff.
Yeah, there's a couple things that I want to tease out. One is in hearing you talk about the ways in which you talk about nutrition and healthy eating. I think that when dietitians find themselves, but I don't get it. Like, I'm not trying to talk about diet. I'm not trying to talk about weight loss. I'm trying to talk about improving balance on the plate or, and I can empathize with that kind of lostness feeling and confusion. But it's like, I think you're showing that there is actually so much more to talk about and so much opportunity because you have the awareness of what it's like to be in this oppressive, exclusive diet culture and can help them disentangle from it and reframe the idea of health and well-being and it not being an individual food or ingredient and that all that is really important, powerful work. And if you're not that type of dietitian if your job isn't working, say, in lower socioeconomic status in community nutrition roles, by supporting the benefit for those who are, you're uplifting everybody, right? So, because I think that's another thing. Oh, well, I'm out of pocket, pay for fee for services or whatever. So I don't know how the socioeconomic stuff affects me. I just got to give my client what they want. And I think, no. I think that if we have a common humanity, what we do at the higher power absolutely matters. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. Well, a couple things came up that I wrote down as I was listening to you. One is, we all get to have a personal food philosophy, but we don't project our personal food philosophies onto our clients. And unfortunately, because every human being has a relationship with food, and every healthcare provider out there has a relationship with food, a lot of times their personal food philosophies are the things they're recommending to their clients. Dietitians are not the only people talking to people about their food. So many providers, step out of scope of practice when it comes to this stuff. But we're all allowed a personal food philosophy. I have a way of eating I prefer, but I don't project that onto my clients. I don't talk about my personal food philosophy with my clients, but I get to have one. I think when we know our personal food philosophy is rooted in a connective, embodied place, we don't have to make a big deal about it. There's no look at me. There's no the vegan has arrived to the party, right? Or like people who are doing gluten-free from a place of like dieting and really have no idea. Like my friends who have celiac disease, they go to a restaurant, they look at a menu, they navigate it as best they can. When the server comes, they say, I'm looking at your menu. I have celiac disease. I have a severe gluten sensitivity. I'm looking at these 3 dishes. Can you confirm with me that these are gluten-free?
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's how an embodied person takes care of themselves, when their choice to eat a certain way is embodied. People who aren't embodied, they go into the restaurant and they go, like, I'm gluten-free. What can I eat here? Right? It's like they have to make a pronouncement of what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one way I've talked about the idea of gentle nutrition,
Mm-hmm.
is that when we know our choices to eat this versus that are coming from an embodied place, we don't have to tell everyone around us what we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not connected to our self-worth, our value. There's not a performative nature to it. Right? And this idea of performative is something I'm thinking about more and more. I was talking to my clients. You do not have to perform health.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to perform good eating or right eating. I'm putting that in air quotes, right? But we all get to have a personal food philosophy, but it's ours. I think thoughts about weight impact our ability to eat attuned, in an attuned, intuitive way. And I think thoughts about nutrition also interfere with our clients who are trying to heal their relationship with food and body. That thoughts about nutrition interfere with their ability to listen to what they want. It's about doing the right thing. In intuitive eating, sometimes I'll explain to clients, like, they put the gentle nutrition chapter in the back of the book for a reason.
Far away from all the other stuff that you need to work on first.
Yeah. And when you get to that chapter, I think it even says it's important to work through these other chapters. I tell my clients to, when they get to that chapter, because most people inhale that book and don't work through the principles of it, but just inhale it. When they get to that chapter, I tell them to stop and go back to the beginning, because it just, if we haven't healed our relationship with food and our bodies and have a solid foundation in body trust work, all that nutrition information is just going to collude with the dieting mind, and you're going to be using it more as, they call it, a nutrition informant in the book versus an ally, a way of taking care of yourself. So we say not now to thoughts about that. I do talk to clients about meal mixes and just noticing how different mixes of food sustain them. Like if they eat eggs and toast for breakfast versus a bowl of oatmeal for breakfast versus yogurt and fruit and granola for breakfast. Like, how many hours do you get out of that before you're hungry again? Like, looking at the meal mix is something I do more with my clients. If I wrote a book on body trust, I would not include a nutrition chapter at all.
I can appreciate that. I can see why. It is because you're putting something out there for the masses that is something that actually is highly, highly, highly individual.
Yeah.
I get
and a
that.
way of, I think some people feel better when they're eating a more like plant-based diet, more vegetarian. I think some people feel terribly anemic and don't feel good at all when they're eating more of a vegetarian. Like, it's to think that there's one way of eating for everybody is ridiculous, given that we used to not even be able to fly food across continents. We ate more locally. We ate more culturally. Like, to say that people in Africa should be eating like people in Italy is kind of ridiculous. And that's the last point I want to make here, is that when we mess with people's food, we mess with people's lives. We mess with their culture. We mess with their history. Animals go to the trough and feed, human beings dine. We commune through food, we grieve, we celebrate, and to dumb it down to its nutritive components is a disservice to human beings and what food actually is for us in our lives.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And just for, for dietitians kind of coming around to this reframe, is to just understand, there are ways in which diet culture influenced you and to get to this point, but you can also reject it, walk away from it, and learn and grow. I know we are getting really short on time. I really want to ask you another question, and that is, what do you think people mostly our misunderstanding about like radical and what it means to be radical and how radical is beneficial. I guess that's 3 questions, but just answer it however you would like. But I just think there's a lot of misunderstanding around it. And if people could just work around that they would more embrace this idea of rebelling against diet culture.
I think the thing that comes to my mind is that you already know this.
Mm.
I think when we start to really look at this work, it's not as radical as we think it is because it really is truth. And it's getting back to what we already know in ways, but has been unlearned. And so that's one thing I'm thinking about is like how people think it's so radical when really it's connected to source and truth. And so it's not as radical as we think it is when we really get underneath it and look at what we're talking about. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's like radical is actually natural.
Right. There's these systems and institutions that have taken us away from the truth. Mm-hmm. And so while the in some ways the dominant culture makes us feel like we're the weirdos and that we're the ones drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yes.
Like they're the ones drinking the Kool-Aid. Like I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid over here. The other thing that comes up, and this isn't really the question, but like what makes it hard for people to choose this radical path is conformity, how, it's easier to live a life when, sometimes when you don't feel questioned for what you believe, it feels safer to stay in our smallness, right? Like I think there's that kind of stuff too. But I can tell you that the world is ready for this. It's primed for this, and people need this, and people resonate deeply with this work, even if they're not ready. Mm-hmm. We can be bold, we can be fierce, and we can be compassionate. I love Clarissa Pinkola Estes says, make no mistake, I can weep and be fierce at the same time.
Ooh, oh my gosh, I love that.
Yes.
I love that. And just by talking with you today, I just have this sense when we compare that sort of research scientist version of you to like today's liberated, empowered version, that you love your work and life more. And maybe, and so for listeners to kind of think about that you might have this fear that you're going to lose things or that you're going to regret it. But through your story, it's actually quite the opposite. And do you have any thoughts on that? Any kind of closing remarks on that, on what you're getting out of your work now?
Oh, yeah. We're just in the process of like revising a ton of stuff. Like we've rewritten what the body trust framework is. What is body trust? We just sent out today. We have new core elements and phases. And while it's kind of exhausting because it trickles into everything we do, it has also really invigorated me. So I find myself thinking about that, of how like to be talking about this in some new ways is really, really gives me life. I think, hearing from people who are influenced by this work really makes me know that even on days when it's really hard to be the weirdo in the room, because you're going to feel weird when you're radical, right? Even though like really it's the truth, it connects to source of truth. It can be exhausting. And some days, Hillary and I look at each other and we're like, should we just like open like a shoe store or something? It would be so much easier. At the end of the day, I can't imagine doing anything else, because to know that we're making a difference in the world, to know that we're making the world better for all bodies, to know that we're contributing to the movement towards social justice is everything to me. It's going to be a little mark in the grand scheme of things. The social justice world is a long game. It's not a quick fix. We're really doing this for future generations. To think that a little boy or girl could be born into this world and not get indoctrinated into diet culture at some point, to have parents trusting their child's bodies to grow to be the size and shape that are right for them, to know that someday this might not be an issue is what really keeps me going.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect way to close the idea of someday, and to not lose hope that even if it's not in our lifetime, we can do what we can in our lifetime to make it better, and that what the important work we're doing now is going to lead to that someday.
Yes.
Well, this has been so wonderful. I want to talk to you for 5 more hours. So I don't know if that means future podcasts or what. I'll come to Oregon. But where can folks connect with you, learn more about Be Nourished and everything you have to offer?
Yeah. So we have a Facebook group. We have an Instagram page, and we also are on Twitter. So you can find us on social media. If you go to our website, benourished.org, the active phrase be nourished.org, you can explore you'll find a link to be able to explore Body Trust with our free downloadable workbook, and you can find links to our classes and courses and workshops. We have offerings for both the general public as well as providers wanting to bring Body Trust into their clinical practice and into their work. We offer an e-course for providers as well as a certification program. So there's something for everyone really on our site. We have a blog you can read, but that's where you'll find us. We live in Portland. We're in Portland, Oregon. If you're in Portland, Oregon, you can connect with us here as well.
That's so wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, you're welcome, Rebecca. Thanks for having me.
And that's our show. Let's continue this conversation in our Facebook group. Just search Body Kindness Podcast and ask to join the group. We also love ratings and reviews. Please subscribe to the Body Kindness Podcast and give us an honest rating and review. And if you can, tell a friend. If you'd like to support the podcast for the 2018 season, please donate at gofundme.com/bodykindness.